From Immersive Labs, this is Cyber Humanity. Hello again, I'm your host Chris Pace. In these podcasts, we try to look at cybersecurity from a human point of view, social engineering, hacker motivations, industry trends, and more. They essentially come in two flavours, either us ranting about themes close to the hearts of security types, or us chatting about threat and security stuff from recent weeks, and this episode is one of those. As per usual, I'm joined by Kev Breen.
Hello.
Paul Bentham.
Hello.
And Max Vetter.
Hello.
So this week we are going to begin by treading towards potentially some controversy. We did that thing again where we started talking about this before we started recording the podcast, and had to, because we all had there was so much.
A little bit ranty.
Yeah, I think people were almost. I would go as far as to say angry.
Ooh.
There was
Let's
some
see if
anger.
we can keep it under our hats.
Yeah, I think that so people may get to a gentle simmer during this conversation that we're about to talk about next. If you live in the UK, unless you live under a rock, you'll know that the government has decided to remove Huawei 5G kit from the 5G rollout that's been happening here. I don't know, how long has this been going on for? It feels like forever. It feels longer than Crossrail.
Well, this has been going on forever, because the idea that a foreign national who has stated aims against quote-unquote the West would have telephony equipment in the core of the UK's network is a fear, right? It's a fear. We've been worried about this for a long time, and Huawei are innovating in this space, and they're the ones with the 5G technology, and they're the first to the market, it was all done. We were done with this. I'm a little bit verging on ranty, but we were done with this
already.
I do remember watching a documentary where Ian Levy, NCSC, was interviewed on Panorama, and was very clear about the fact that this was the right equipment. The security concerns or the risks that were there, they felt were effectively mitigated. It was essentially reassuring the public. And yet, probably about maybe a year or so later, here we are.
I mean, look, here's the thing, right? So the NCSC have been working with Huawei hand in hand for probably 5 years. I think there's been 5 annual reports, so something around about since 2014, 2013, 2014, at the highest levels to provide the assurance that the ways that they're building the equipment, that it's not like they've snuck in some tech that's got like, ooh, look at this back door, we know all the secret keys. Like, it's none of that. It's been properly assessed as being secure, not for the use in the most sensitive network. So let's be 100% clear here. Like, we're not saying that it's going to be doing top secret comms for the nuclear submarines, but what they had approved and as recently as March, that Huawei equipment could be used in UK telephony for 5G. And then...
And now for some reason, we can't.
Well, we know why we can't. It's partly politics. So, we've...
Partly?
Well...
Partly?
I'm a little... What the US have done. I'm trying to be very kind here.
He's tiptoeing.
Trying to be very kind here. Well, it is actually quite interesting from a technical perspective, but what the US have done is that they do not want Huawei quit. And I don't suspect it was great at the political levels for when the US said, this is a bad idea, and the UK said, hey, we're fine with it. But what the US did is they've changed the rules. So they put, I'm going to have to read this out, a foreign produced direct product rule. So they changed an export control rule. So all governments have export control rules that stop you exporting stuff that you don't want the baddies to have, right? So it's encrypted products. So the UK, if you're a company in the UK and you're using encryption, you have to apply for an export license. And you know what? These are really good ideas. Like if I've written a bit of technology that allows me to spy on my citizens, you don't really want that in the hands of a totalitarian state, right? That seems like a bad thing. And, developers, I am a bit ranty about this, aren't I? Yeah. Developers don't want to. Everybody's looking at me. I'm like, I'm ranting already, aren't I? I haven't even started. So the US have changed the foreign produced direct product rule, which stops the export of tools and technologies used in the fabrication of chips. So it's super subtle. Now, what this means is people manufacturing Huawei chips to go into their 5G networking capabilities, and these are like the base stations, all the core network stuff, can't use US tools to do that. And if they can't use the US tools to do that, which they've been using to this date to manufacture the kind of super the small gaps in the fabrication of the chips, if they can't use US kit to do that, then they're going to have to buy the chips from elsewhere. And if they can't buy the chips from elsewhere, then all of the work that and if they do buy the chips from elsewhere, then all the work that the NCSC have done to assure that security of that supply chain and all that technology is null and void. And therefore, the NCSC can no longer guarantee the security of that equipment in UK networks, and therefore Huawei kit can no longer be used.
Wait, so just to let it get me straight, this is the funny bit about this is the US said these chips are dodgy and they might hack you. So because of that, we're going to put the sanctions on the chips, which therefore make them potentially dodgy and could hack you. So now we have to ban them.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing.
It's brilliant.
I mean, in some ways, like, if I don't get ranty about it, in some ways, it's a very clever way for US government policy to influence global policy. And it shows you how dependent we are on a global supply chain. Like, what's going to be really interesting is how on earth the Chinese retaliate.
Well, we are, of course, even more dependent in the context of Brexit. We're in a weaker position right now, attempting to negotiate with, amongst other countries, the United States, and so in a way, the timing for them couldn't be better. I'm trying to understand some of the more in-depth parts of this, but one of the things that's slightly concerning is that they are saying there is the potential that there are security issues with this equipment, yet they're saying that the equipment itself won't be removed until 2027.
Well, no, you got to be super careful. The NCSC aren't saying there's security issues with the equipment they've evaluated. Okay. What they're saying is there won't be an unlimited supply chain of parts for the equipment. So from this date forward, the manufacturers of Huawei chips that they need in this equipment is now either somebody's got to break US law to build those chips, which seems unlikely. Huawei switched chips to a different manufacturer that aren't Huawei designed or haven't used this technology to design them, which seems also unlikely. Or someone makes some new tools. But in both of those latter two cases, the technology will not have been part of the evaluation that NCSC have already carried out, and therefore NCSC can't assure those new designs of those chips or those new replacement parts.
This isn't just 5G either. Like, the fiber core is also provided by Huawei as well. So
FTTP stuff.
Yeah, so that's going to have to come out as well as part of this. So even though, and this is the thing that strikes me as a bit odd, is the deadline still applies to this stuff. So these are using those chips that have already been approved. They're using the technology that's already been approved, yet we're rushing to pull them out. And I get that if they break, then we need to have the supply chain in place, but we need to temper this response and not just rush to yank everything out.
I think they've got 7 years.
We're not rushing.
7
years.
7 years.
We're doing the exact opposite of rushing.
We're not allowed to bring as of December, we're not allowed to bring anything new in. So if one of these fiber routers breaks, we can't replace it because that supply chain is now blocked to us. So we're going to have to go quick to get it out because we're going to need replacements should kits start breaking, which is inevitable to happen.
And what happens with all the private companies who, a lot of them have hold of this kit or will have contracts with Huawei? I assume they just all have to go to the next vendor, which is, I assume, is as of today put their prices up a lot. Like, how does that even work?
I mean, the NCSC are kind of keen to point out that it's not just Huawei; it's all high-risk vendors, and presumably that means vendors of important kit from countries we don't like.
You summarised the whole challenge, and we have discussed this on previous podcasts, on previous episodes of this podcast. we are seeing security concerns in technology being used as political levers to pull, because governments get to decide, who bad actors are and who okay actors are, despite the fact that they could be doing exactly the same thing. And that feels to me like the climate that we're in now is that the idea of the impact of a cyber attack is so prevalent, is so front of mind for the general public, that using it as a way to generate fear of those countries that have opposing political viewpoints to us is an easy thing to do.
The other thing that I'm sort of mini ranty about was that this week a lot of the front page headlines of our newspapers, I think it was either the Sunday or Monday papers, it was Cyber 9/11. Like there's a coming cyber. So somebody from government had been briefing the newspapers that there was a Cyber 9/11 coming. Like, I don't even know where to start with that kind of briefing. What are the public supposed to do with that fact? Like, thousands of people are going to be killed by a cyber incident. What are you talking about? Like, that's got nothing to do with what we're defending and worried about with cyber. Was that a pre-brief to make this whole Huawei decision seem less bad or more justified? What is going on?
Without getting into the political realm, I'll go around and ask you all, do we think this decision would have been made with a different government and different administration?
Hang on, in the UK?
Political.
In the UK or in the US?
Both
In the
UK and in the US.
So let me take the UK question. So the NCSC have played this with a completely straight bat, as far as I'm concerned. They played it apolitically. They didn't duck. They could have made the decision back in March, February when they first came out with their recommendation. They didn't. They played it with a straight bat. They said, technically, we have assured it. We're happy with it, the capability. And frankly, and I'm off on my other mini rant right now, the thing that hurts here is innovation. The technology that Huawei are bringing to the innovation of next generation equipment is and we as consumers are going to suffer from this decision because it's put back the progress of telecoms equipment just because the US don't like the China. Oh, I've done it, haven't I? Just because the US don't like it, and it's Donald Trump and it's the Trump administration that have done this.
It's put it back to the tune of 7 years and £2 billion at minimum that it will cost this country to fix that problem.
Yeah, and it's gone back further. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of companies now who are going to have to play catch up, and in the time they're catching up, well, two things. So one, we're losing that advantage because we no longer have the technology, and second, like Huawei aren't going to stop. They're going to keep going. Like China's telecoms are going to advance quicker now than ours. So we're doing a disservice to ourselves in two places.
Having the wrong argument. Like, the innovation in the internet isn't for us as consumers. Like, imagine all the exciting possibilities you get from having, ultra high def. I don't quite even know what the F5G bandwidth is, but like ultra high def streaming to a single endpoint. Like, the next generation of services that you get and the innovation you get on top of the commodity of the network is the critical thing. It'd be like somebody like killing battery innovation for me. Like, somebody, for the love of God, make a really good battery. That's the thing that's holding back every bit of like technical advancement, like network bandwidth and batteries. Solve those problems.
Elon
solve
Musk is
life.
on it.
Yeah,
Elon Musk is doing batteries.
I love Elon.
Just going back to that point about the NCSC and their kind of involvement in this decision and the PR around it. It's similar in the article that you were talking about, the Cyber 9/11 article. Actually, the NCSC was obviously approached for comment. The most of the comment in that article came from some MP, some Tory MP, the chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee, and he gets like a paragraph's worth of him talking about, the way of life we take for granted is under real threat and all this kind of stuff. Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre said it is not expecting a rise in attacks. That's the one sentence. That's the one sentence. The National Cybersecurity Centre, that's the one mention that they got in that article.
It's not sexy to say that, though, is it?
Can you just imagine being in the NCSC press office where they say, hey, we're going to go to press with this Cyber 9/11 headline. You got any comments for it? They're like, what? What? What are you talking about? We're not expecting any increased threats. Like,
It reads like a bad airport novel. First of all, it's got all the classic fear mongering that you would expect. Like, it is completely possible that national infrastructure will be ground to a halt, and there will be phone and power blackouts, and bring hospitals, governments, and businesses to a halt. The Daily Mail reported.
I mean, I didn't even dare read it because I didn't have enough. I just didn't have enough energy to be angry about it. But it's disrespectful to the people that died and the families of the people that died to claim that any kind of cyber incident, unless you're talking about something that is completely like Die Hard 4.0 level of incident, like, unless you're talking about that, and even that, rioting and like complete like shutdown of society, unless you're talking about something like that, then it's disrespectful to call it a 9/11, because people actually died then, and that's completely different to any cyber incident that you could imagine.
So shall we just talk briefly as we wrap up this segment then about how, as those of us who are in the community working in cybersecurity, what I find interesting about articles like this is that the NCSC gets one line and the politicians get 3 paragraphs. How do we go about fixing that? Because the facts, there are facts that need to be communicated. It references the Australia report, the sustained cyber attacks. That's the way they're describing that Australia's come under, which hasn't been effectively attributed in any way. So no one is able to say, as a fact, this is a nation state actor, or this is
You mean
China.
a true fact?
Or an alternate, or potentially an alternative fact.
Yeah.
So it just feels to me like as an industry, there's a job for us to do here. As a community, there's a job for us to do. The NCSC, it feels like, are potentially a little bit trapped between the politics and their role, and so what can be done? How can we be, or those who represent the industry in the wider and more mainstream media, how can they start to pour at least a little bit of water on some of these fires? Because it's getting worse, happening every week, I think.
But I think the it's played out everywhere. Like the NCSC, you could say, is the role of the scientist here. They're just trying to give facts, trying to give the reality, and then we know what's happened to science in this last few years. Science isn't something that has real fact, or it's just a theory that you can discount if you choose to, and it's similar here, and it goes across the board with media are kind of accepting non-facts because they're more exciting, and why not? If a politician is saying something, there's going to be a cyber 9/11, that's much more interesting to cover that than the NCSC just say there's not, and that's the problem across it. It's more interesting news, and it's the news that the politicians want to push. So that's the main problem here as well.
And I feel like we were talking about this, a few months ago. When we were talking about the whole Zoom thing and how that all got massively blown out of proportion in the mainstream media. And it feels to me like there's these are easy fears to play on now. And so they're places where the mainstream media goes in order to hype up this stuff, leading us on neatly to talk about TikTok. Now, TikTok has become massively popular over the last year or so. And we saw there was a bit of security research that was done. Like, Kev, I think you've got some insight here. There was a bit of security research done a little while ago saying you should never have this app installed in your phone. There's all these things that are wrong with it. And I seem to remember that it wasn't actually that bad. But now there are bans cropping up all over the place. So how bad is the TikTok thing? Like, is it really a security risk, or is it overplayed?
So I wouldn't go so far as to say there was a good bit of security research done.
Okay.
There's a guy who took the TikTok app and pulled it to pieces and made some very bold, sweeping statements, and some of it's true, some of it's hype. TikTok, the same as most other social media platforms, they're interested in you and your data. That's their sole purpose of being. It's how they make money. They're a money-driving business.
Is it worth repeating the often used statement that if you're not paying for something, you are the product?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would argue that the TikTok privacy statements, like, they're very loose. Like, everything you upload, like, immediately belongs to the company. They can use it however they like, don't have to ask you. But again, like, these things shouldn't be surprising to you if you're, like, creating videos and
You're sharing
uploading
it
them
with the whole
publicly.
world
You're
anyway.
sharing it with the world anyway. There were some, like, faux pas in some of the code. Like, they were using GPS pinging, maybe more than you should be. You couldn't install the app without turning it off, but they weren't, strictly speaking, like, oh my god, they're if you're a privacy advocate, then this is bad. But for everybody else, it's not as bad as you think it is.
Can I guess that TikTok's a Chinese app?
There you go. And so I've just pulled. So the reason why the US us and large companies are starting to kick this in is because a couple of months ago, or in July, a load of K-pop fans abused TikTok to take control of a Trump rally.
Oh yeah, I love
few
this
weeks ago.
story.
This was the TikTok that went viral. That was basically you can all go online and buy tickets to this Trump
Yes.
rally.
A million
And that's
people.
what they did to make it seem like it was sold out.
Oh,
and in fact,
no.
hardly anyone turned up.
So at which point,
No way.
Yeah.
So it's bad. Oh.
yeah. So at which point, Trump confirmed the US is considering a TikTok ban. Look what happened with China with this virus. What they've done to this country and to the entire world is disgraceful. This is Trump in a private vendetta against the TikTok company and blaming China because, as far as he's concerned, this is political manipulation. And that's what he said. Like, that's what he came out and said.
So TikTok and Huawei is quite an interesting. I saw a video that described how Chinese apps are being developed and analogized. The apps being created like on an island away from the mainland and where the animals would evolve in a different way. And because the apps within China have to work within the firewall of China, and they have to have all this access from the Chinese authorities, so they naturally already are going to be pretty bad in privacy. But interestingly, they are innovating way faster than we are. You know, they if you look at WeChat, which is a massive app in China, it does so much more than originally. I think it kind of was trying to be Facebook, right? And now it's Facebook and everything else is LinkedIn, and so
It does payment transactions in WeChat.
it does everything.
A friend of mine just came back from, well, it was in China, came back during the coronavirus. You can't buy anything unless you've got a WeChat account. Like,
Yeah,
you
You
literally
can-
need it to exist.
You can literally do everything, which on one side, if we're thinking about human rights and data, it's really scary. But this is all part of that. Is they are innovating now. They're innovating in a different way, and from a Western democracy side, it is scary that they do have access to all this data, and the Chinese authorities require you to give access. But on the other side, if we're just banning all that innovation, that will, as Paul said earlier, will just make us all, weaker and not as rich in the future for the development of tech.
India have banned it. India
But
have banned
what's
TikTok.
What's India's relationship with China like? I don't know what the
Not-
ins and outs.
yeah,
are.
I'm not-
I
Not
don't
great.
think it's great.
Can you imagine you're sitting there in the TikTok headquarters? You think, I've got this app. It's gone viral. It's probably the number one downloaded, like one of the most popular. Like like culture, global culture is kind of coming out through this app, and you're thinking, I'm so proud of this product I've built. I love our users. Like, I don't like being Chinese, but I just, I don't like having to deal with all the Chinese government like stuff. But hey, I just have to deal with it. And then all of a sudden, overnight, because Donald Trump doesn't like TikTok, he's said he's banning it, and then everybody's banning it. And and we've seen like his form when it comes to like making political threats. Like, maybe I'm a little bit too political here, but like, I'd be really disappointed, like, if I'm in that product company and this lovely app I've built is banned. That'd be
We're
very sad.
already starting to see, and I hate the term, but TikTok influencers, they're already being pulled away to other platforms. So
Where do
smaller
they go?
platforms.
Insta.
So Instagram and companies are actually paying people to move from TikTok to other platforms like Instagram, so they can draw their following with them. And arguably now we've got 5 or 6 different new products which we don't know anything about that haven't had any kind of oversight. Like, TikTok's been out enough that people have looked at it and are comfortable with it. So
I don't think this is another example of it not being a cyber issue.
Yes.
The knock on though is that once governments start to ban things, then companies start to ban things as well. So a company that I worked at previously, during when the whole Huawei thing first came up, we were able to choose our own laptops, and we got an email saying if you have a Huawei laptop, you need to get rid of it and buy something else. So companies are prepared to go along with these decisions, make an assumption that the government is leading them in the right way, when it all feels like what we're saying is that clearly right now it is all highly politicized. And ironically, coming back to cyber full circle for a minute, I feel like this all started with Kaspersky, a company that had been establishing itself as a leading player, building their brand globally, trusted by tons of companies, thousands of companies all over the world. And then an aspersion was cast, again, without real proof. An aspersion was cast, and suddenly it was like, well, now Kaspersky is banned, mainly because they're a Russian headquartered company, and we don't like that very much.
It's just what's really annoying about it is that if you were banning companies based on their cybersecurity credentials alone, I would never have to use WebEx again, and that would be great.
Yeah, ironically, WebEx continues to escape the axe of this ban.
How is that even possible? Oh wait, it's a US company, so they're good security vulnerabilities.
Right, they're good security vulnerabilities in a terrible, terrible product.
Yes.
But it does make a good point that there are Chinese companies and I'm sure Russian companies that are being controlled by the state and that are bad for our security, and just getting rid of companies because they're Chinese in these instances just dilutes the message, right? If you don't trust any science, then you don't trust any science. And that's the problem, is how do we know now whether anything is good cybersecurity or not, or if it's just the whim of a politician?
How'd I get on rant out of 10? Was I like 8?
It wasn't bad.
No, not too bad. How does it compare to my Amazon Fire thing on the plane?
Oh no, it's nowhere near that.
I know. Yeah,
Solid 11.
The pitch woke up every dog in the street from that Amazon Fire rant.
Did we do F5 properly? Because there's stuff
Yeah.
we did on F5.
Yeah,
but
we covered it in a fair amount of detail.
Did we talk about all the bad coding practices though?
As I've done more investigation, I've found some terrible, terrible, terrible things.
Right. Well, don't stop now.
So I took one of their archives, so one of their things. I ran the static code analyzer against, and yes, there's going to be false positives in there, but 5,500 results. Even if only 1% of those, and I've already found valid findings. I've already reported valid findings from that data set up to F5.
Have they got a bug bounty program?
No,
No,
which is
they
fucking
don't.
brilliant.
Of course they
I'm
don't.
swearing again. In the email I got from F5 Security, they point out the fact that in the email they say, we do not offer any financial rewards for any disclosed vulnerabilities, but we'll put your name on it.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's nice.
Nice. Well, then you've made it.
They're a $2 billion company. And I'd argue that the reason they don't run a bug bounty is because they'd lose all $2 billion of that revenue.
£1 per vulnerability.
At one point, there was a JSP script, which is there's a Java page which calls a Perl script, which renders HTML, which calls a Bash script, which calls awk. And the GET request...
That's how I decoded it.
The GET request is passed all the way from the bit of code I write in the URL...
Ooh, to awk.
all the way through that entire chain, all the way to awk. And the only thing that saves them, is they strip spaces. So, it's so bad. It's so bad that it ends up being secure. There's a library that runs their database. That library is from 2008. That library was updated last week.
Wow.
But they're still using the 2008 version. They're using Java 7, which went end of life. I'm getting ranty now because this thing is
Kev's gone
awful.
Kev's
It's so bad.
This is level 10 rant for Kev.
They've got Java applications. They've got PHP. They've got Angular. They've got honestly, when I started to look at it, I got so bad. I got so upset.
What happens in the PHP stuff, Kev? I think we can keep it going for ages.
It's PHP 3. The file extensions are PHP 3. Like it's it's so bad. Like I think I cried. I think I died a little inside. Like the more I read. Yeah. So yeah, that's the extra stuff on F5 that we found since last week. I'm calling it now. There's going to be more vulnerabilities.
Oh,
than that.
I mean, is it that? I mean, tell me why it's not as bad as it sounds, Kev.
So this thing is monolithic.
But it's not internet facing, is it? These are like second line of defense.
Yeah, it shouldn't be internet facing. Like we know there are 7,582 of them internet facing, but that's misconfiguration. And whilst there are a lot of incredibly bad code in practice, but bad code in practice doesn't mean vulnerable. What it does mean is that, the thing with F5, there was a bypass there was an authentication bypass that then meant these bad coding practices suddenly came into play. If something else like that comes along, like there's some way of bypassing a check or somebody finds it, then all of these things suddenly kick into play.
Okay, so last week we were talking about the rare double event. I've now dubbed it the double event of two CVSS 10s, CVEs with CVSS 10s in it, and we're saying it doesn't happen all that often. It's fairly rare. And then this week we've had another two. So we've seen one in Windows DNS. And then this one in SAP that we're going to talk about, which has been codenamed Recon. That's a pretty
bit lazy.
It's pretty lazy.
Well, actually, as I discovered, remote code execution on NetWeaver, I think is the acronym for Recon.
Hang on, that's the wrong way round. That would be RCE.
No, remote. So code.
Oh, come on.
Oh, that's lazy.
And not only lazy, but grammatically incorrect.
Also, Kev did that in a slightly patronising way. That's how I teach my daughter to read.
I'm a 4-year-old learning to read. Yeah.
I'm bringing it down to your level, Paul.
Actually, it helps quite a lot.
So let's talk about the thrilling remote code execution in
NetWeaver.
SAP NetWeaver. In fact, Kev, you can start off by telling us what NetWeaver is.
So SAP is a whole suite of products, and they're used in large enterprise, and they're used for like business critical applications. I think there's a quote somewhere from a Fortune 500 CISO that says if SAP were to go down, they'd lose $20 million a second or a minute or something ridiculous like that.
Nice.
They do a lot of stuff. I've used these in previous companies, like all of our expenses, like all of our pay, like all of that stuff went through a SAP application. So these are big and they're expensive, which means you usually only find them in large organizations. And this vulnerability actually sits in the underlying operating system. So this is a Java-based stack. So you have lots of different SAP Java applications. The vulnerability exists in the application server, in the underlying thing. So this affects pretty much every SAP product. And what makes this a bit... So this is authentication bypass. From a standard web browser, I can send a HTTP request or a series of them that will let me create an admin account, which gives me full access to your entire SAP environment. And SAP is designed to be public facing. It's designed for your users to access it from any of their laptops. These things typically are open to the internet because your users need to be able to use it. So this one has the potential to be fairly damaging to an organization. So not in terms of like what you could do with the vulnerability, but in terms of the level of access of data you get to. You could start manipulating payments, finances. There's a lot of damage that could happen there.
So you think it justifies its 10 out of 10?
In terms of the actual vulnerability itself, maybe not, but in terms of the impact that it can have on an organization, I think definitely, yeah.
But we aren't seeing this being exploited yet, as far as we know. I should ask another question. Have any national security agencies gone public to talk about whether they think this is a threat that we should be concerned about?
None that I've seen, and this is the bit that I really hate. So, the amount of pre-release that went into this announcement of this recon bug. So, they did one thing right. So, responsible disclosure with SAP, report them, fix them, release patches, wonderful, brilliant. And then they did the public disclosure. So it's like, now we're going to come out and tell people that this thing exists and like reinforce the fact that it's important to patch. Great. So the first thing I do is I want to know what it is, how it works, like all of this technical detail. So I start to Google, I start to look, and I hit the first paywall of where I have to hand over my name, email address, job title.
How
home
much
address.
information were they giving you before the paywall?
No more than is in the advisory. So just there's a vulnerability that affects all SAP products. These are the versions you want to update to.
Yeah, okay.
So for the actual technical details, the bit that's really interesting, one as a red team if I want to go into this, but more importantly as a network defender, like understanding what this is, how to spot it, what kind of logs, like what kind of things to look for. Those are the important things. And like with the F5 vulnerability, with the other vulnerabilities that get reported, they're very open about sharing this, and I can't even remember the name of the company. Onesies?
Anapsys.
Anapsys.
Onesies. That's a different Google you've been doing there, Kevin.
Yeah. So I'm on the ZDNet article. Recon bug lets hackers create admin accounts on SAP. Great. The bug code named Recon. So I click on that and I get a sign up for our webinar.
Oh,
Great.
not even a blog.
No blog article. That literally their website is sign up for our webinar. Download the PDF. All right, so you've got a technical PDF. Let me download that. All right, so you want my name, my job description, like where I work, like the name of my mother's name. You want all this, fine. Just have some of that with a fake account. I get the technical PDF that doesn't give me any technical information. It's a sales pitch. Like this
Should have joined that webinar. See.
This company is a SAP security company. Like their entire purpose of being is to provide security to SAP. And I get that you've got your bottom line. Like you made the discovery, you get the right to own some of that, but like don't lock all of that useful technical information that I need as a defender and force me to listen to 35 minutes of your sales pitch before showing me a low res video.
Yeah. I think that may have ground
another
his
rant
gears
coming
a little.
on.
Ground his gears a little. And I would have to say that as a so now putting my marketer's hat on, of course our industry requires a fine balance between the amount of intelligence that we share against attempting to generate interest in the product that we're selling, but in most cases where the work has been done that demonstrates you have expertise in that field, actually the last thing you want to do is put it behind a paywall. It doesn't advantage anybody, and actually doesn't advantage you or your brand, and now you've got a negative experience of them.
I mean, we've just gone through that this is a CVSS 10, and we recognise this is critical. And the day it was released, it was join us in 8 hours and we'll tell you about this. Like, I'm awake now. I want to fix this now. I don't want to wait 8 hours till I'm in the correct time zone for you to be able to tell me more.
Yeah, I understand. And the webinar thing, I understand actually is probably the better method. Probably the better methodology would have been, here's a blog that gives you the technical information that you need. We're going to run a webinar that will go into detail about how we discovered this thing and all the kind of background that someone like you would be interested in, and probably would have been prepared to sacrifice your information for.
And I joined the webinar. Like either way, I was still interested. I would have joined that because the webinar was setting out like what's the risks, and that was the one thing. So not to fully hate on them, they did go into the like what are the dangers of this, like what kind of information is exposed. They covered that bit really well. It's just like I could have been more proactive with the other stuff had you done like some better disclosure.
There's no reason. Is there any reason whatsoever that they do that and not either put a video on their website or put it in a blog?
The rest of their marketing is so bad potentially that this is the one thing that they felt they could, if they knew they were going to get heaps of press, this was the one thing that they thought they could have maximized in order to get as many. Well, I'm not even going to call them leads. What they're trying to do is to build their database with the right kind of people, and so it's also ended up making them look less credible, and that actually is what will end up hurting them, because if someone is responsible for security for SAP, there's now the risk that they don't consider these guys as an option because they've hurt their credibility in that way.
Yeah, I was just looking through the SAP Security Day release notes, which is on the second Tuesday of every month. Fun website. Thrilling. Their priority is low to hot news.
Yes, hot news. I've forgotten about that.
Right. What's really interesting is I know we're talking about this one now because Kev's a bit grumpy about the webinar he had to go to. But actually, there have been 18 hot news priority this year alone. This is
a lot of webinars.
Yeah, I don't think announcers did a webinar for each of them, but I don't think SAP is great for security. Is kind of my takeaway.
Since we went into lockdown, that's triggered a lot of this. Like, we're finding a lot more bug hunters, security researchers with a lot more free time on their hand to go and do these deeper dives where they've got the time and the capacity to start taking a closer look at some of these products. With a lot of these products being available really cheap. So before you used to have to run large infrastructure, you used to have to pay very expensive licenses to get these. With places like AWS Marketplace, with Azure Marketplace, I can spin one of these up for like $12 a day and just have free reign on it to play.
Now that would be a better Daily Mail headline. Not Cyber 9/11, but bored vulnerability researchers save the day by not drinking beer as much.
Oh, we still drink beer while we do research.
And I think that's where I must bring us to a close. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe, rate, and comment wherever you get your audio content. And if you want to know more about Immersive Labs, you can find us at immersivelabs.com or follow us on Twitter at Immersive Labs UK.
Are we not going to talk about Sigrid then?
I know, it's boring. Till next time, from all of us, goodbye.